Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Gonna give you some more unsolicited advice of a stupid question I've been asking myself lately. And the question is, when something feels wrong, is it your business to be stepping in and intervening? I've unfortunately been put in some very weird situations lately, kind of testing my impulse control and my willingness to intervene in something versus my ability to restrain myself. I just have had a lot of weird situations where I'm really not sure what I should be doing. So I figured the perfect way to figure this out is to just give my completely unfiltered opinions onto the internet about this. Recently in my life, probably like the last couple years, I've been pretty vocal, or I don't know, a bit public you might say, about not being a bystander, and I'm frequently somebody that kind of stands on the idea that you should be intervening in most bad situations. I've also, though, been somebody that's kind of been in the wrong place at the wrong time and probably opened my mouth when it should have just stayed shut. I do think that there's a time and place for nature to just take its course, but there are a lot of times that I look back on my life, specifically in my later teenage years, where I think I really probably could have made a difference and I made the choice not to. I'm sure most of you guys are familiar with the butterfly effect and just how dangerous it can be. And the idea that one very small, inconsequential, or seemingly inconsequential thing that you do can actually have very long-lasting rippling effects down the line. There are certain things that I have or have not done in my life that have led me to the job that I even have today, which is one of the most critical things in my life. There were times that I had said yes to opportunities, and there were times that I had declined them because I thought it just morally was not the right thing to do. And sometimes it's very, I don't know, almost terrifying to think about just the very curated effect of every single little microcosm of instances in your life, times you said yes or said no to something or did not decide to do something that has led you to exactly where you are right now. It almost seems like it would have been completely impossible to replicate. A really good friend of mine who himself is a musician and whose kid is a child actor has told me that everything in life has a chance of one, not 1 in 10 or 1 in 10,000 or 1 in a million, just one. The odds that it happened are all a direct effect of all the little things that anybody has done in their life that they could have never possibly understood the consequences for. And then I have another friend who's like, everything in life is 50-50 actually. Either it happens or it doesn't, so there's no reason to stress out. Ultimately though, I think deciding whether it's worth your time stressing over how to play God is kind of useless, because it's not that anything is always meant to happen in a perfect way, but maybe we just say things like they're meant to happen the way that they did because it's a relinquishing of control, and that's all we really can rely on, especially in, I don't know, really shitty times and also really happy times. It's kind of the great equalizer of character development and really unfortunate circumstances, and then trying to avoid any sort of imposter syndrome when you happen to find yourself in very, very fortunate circumstances. There's kind of two schools of thought when it comes to acting quickly and making a decision to intervene or not. There's kind of like the utilitarian perspective, which is doing whatever you can and acting in such a way to produce the best possible outcome, not directly speaking on by means of intervening or not. And there's also deontology, which is acting according to duty regardless of the outcome, meaning it's your moral obligation or your duty to speak up if somebody is getting harmed. I've talked about Immanuel Kant's categorical imperative before, this idea that, like, obviously if everybody remained silent, injustice would never end. I've also recently become a little more familiar with people like Peter Singer and the drowning child thought experiment. It sounds very macabre, and that's kind of because it is. Thought experiment is actually extremely simple. It's just the idea that if you were walking past a shallow pond and you saw a child drowning, and you easily had the ability to save them without putting yourself in any sort of harm or danger, but it might, for example, ruin your nice clothes or make you late to a meeting, would you do it? Pretty much everybody agrees, yes, you would do that, which I would certainly hope so. But the follow-up question is just that if morally we feel obligated to save this child nearby that we don't theoretically have any sort of relationship with, then why do we not do similar things that are just as easy to help prevent other kinds of catastrophes in the world? The argument is especially relevant today when, with the power of our smartphones, probably have the ability to make a pretty substantial global impact if we really wanted to. This is the backbone of his argument in his essay Famine, Affluence, and Morality from 1972, which pretty much laid the foundation for much of the modern effective altruism movement. There's people like Oskar Schindler, who saved over 1,200 Jews during the Holocaust by actively stepping in, or the White Rose Resistance, when German students who would speak out against Nazis despite fatal consequences. There are also historical examples of countries not deciding to intervene in certain genocides that are taking shape, or there's the Kitty Genovese case I've mentioned before, like in 1964, that created the bystander effect. I've listed some pretty significant and extremely large and extreme examples of this, but there are also lots of smaller, more interpersonal examples that happen in modern day. It's really hard to be the first person to say that something's wrong, but it's really easy to get on the bandwagon, and I'm guilty of this myself, to be honest. When a child is being pushed into fame or extreme achievement by a parent, is it anybody else's place to intervene? The first example that I immediately think of is Ruby Franke from 8 Passengers, that really twisted and evil woman who abused, neglected, and stopped feeding her children because she wanted to just make content with them and used her kids as accessories to make millions of dollars, and nobody really seemed to intervene. It just happened to be the case that one of her kids was brave enough to run away and call the police. But even in less extreme examples, are we still called to be intervening when parents are pushing their kids into situations that we've seen are likely to lead to roads full of depression, anxiety, and identity issues? I don't think anybody wants to be the person that tells somebody else how to parent their kid, but I also don't think anybody wants to be known as the person who could have stepped in to prevent that kid from having a very tumultuous psychological life ahead and then decided not to. What about if somebody steals something from another person, but you are not the direct victim? Do you have an obligation to say something? There's a very weird triangulation dilemma of loyalty when it comes to being a second-hand victim. I think I've made my position pretty clear on whether or not I personally think that you are still under a moral obligation to speak up for somebody even if you are not the direct victim. However, I'm also not blind to the reality of improperly diffusing a bomb can really blow up in your face. Kind of a modern interpretation of this I sometimes like to think would be hilarious to explain to some Victorian-age child would be going through your partner's phone. Many couples that I know go through that trust versus truth dilemma of if it was really worth it to violate somebody's privacy as a means to an end to getting to the bottom of something, or if it didn't really matter if you were right or wrong to begin with. One of my favorite shows, Black Mirror, explains this idea really well. One of my favorite episodes is this dystopian dating system situation where couples are matched and given a set amount of time to be together on their date, and it's determined by this dating website on like a smartphone. Two characters in this episode fall in love and agree not to check their expiration date, choosing instead to just kind of enjoy the moment. But one of them decides to break the pact and checks, and that act alone causes their time to rapidly count down, ultimately ending the relationship. The twist is that the entire scenario was a simulation to test their compatibility, and their refusal to conform was what proved that they were a true match. It basically explains like Schrodinger's cat, but in a very cool and futuristic way. According to chaos theory, even very well-meaning intervention can cause lots and lots of harm. I think the most difficult part about this whole question is just deciding for yourself whether the situation is actually wrong or not, because there are lots of very clear, obvious black and white situations where the harm is very visible and it makes a choice extremely obvious. The danger is very clear and immediate and posing a threat, and a lot of people can agree on what the right thing to do is, but then there are a lot of situations that kind of just live in this gray zone. Is pushing a kid towards fame abuse, or is it ambition? Is it exploitation, or is it opportunities? I think that a lot of shitty things exist in this moral gray zone because a lot of people probably don't say things not just out of fear, but mostly because they don't want to misjudge the situation and then overstep and then make things even worse. There's kind of this spectrum of responses from total disengagement on one end to active intervention on the other, and cautious presence is kind of somewhere in the middle. I think I may have mentioned this in a video before, but for better or for worse, I think that a lot of the people that I happen to just know in my life do exist closer towards the total disengagement side rather than the actively intervening side. And it's difficult to accurately review if I think that this is a problem or not, because I've been in both situations. I've been in situations where I desperately needed somebody to help me and just step in on my behalf, and I even asked for that directly, and it just didn't happen because people were fearful, and that was extremely damaging. But I've also been in plenty of situations where I had beef with a teacher in high school or something, and my parents were ready to go guns a-blazing into their office and yell at them, and I begged them not to because I knew it was just going to make things so much worse, especially knowing my parents. And they respected that, and thankfully my relationships with those teachers panned out for the best. It's kind of like in sports how if the ref misses all these terrible calls, or if he perfectly referees the game, he still essentially had the same level of efficacy in the outcome. The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. Thank you guys so much for watching. Sorry to ask such a weird question and then kind of not give you my legitimate opinion on this, but hopefully some dialogue in the comments will, tighten the bolts in my brain and I can actually develop my frontal lobe and make up my mind on this whole thing. But either way, I also wanted to say that I have a song out. It's called I'm Sorry That You Gave Your Heart to Me. There's a rock version and a piano version, and I also have Patreon where I post all these videos early and all of my new music early, and you can learn how to play guitar and you can learn how to use Logic Pro and some cool stuff. It's only $1 a month because my Patreon kind of sucks. Anyway, see you guys.